Hello and welcome to another Times Radio question and answer. Today we're answering comments and questions from our channel members on frontline episodes and other videos about the war in Ukraine and its impact on the world stage. I'm Philip Ingram, former senior British military intelligence officer and NATO planner, and now commentator on all matters geopolitical, defence, security and anything else people want to ask my opinion on. Now we've got some good comments and questions in today. The first one comes from Dark Elder. I love the handles that people dream up as they're putting on it. It's great, and I get in my mind how I imagine people sitting behind it. But Dark Elder, you say that the ceasefire talk in the Black Sea really only helps Russia. So why should Ukraine agree unless threatened by the United States? And go on to say Donald does not care for lasting peace. He wants a deal so he can tick it off the list and move on to the next topic. Well, I think you've answered your own question. Donald Trump wants a deal. He's putting pressure on the Ukrainians to accept something. He's putting pressure on the Russians to accept something. And from a Ukrainian perspective, a country with no navy, they've destroyed or put out of action about 50% of the Black Sea fleet. Sunk about a third of it. Forced the Black Sea fleet to withdraw to bases inside Russia away from occupied Crimea. And got them where the Black Sea Fleet is only carrying out very small inshore patrols, not patrolling the Black Sea, not impacting the international grain movement and oil movement out of the Ukrainian ports to be able to provide what the globe needs on the food that comes out of Ukraine. So I don't think Zelensky has got much to lose on this. The Russians have got a lot to gain, and it's allowing the Russians effectively freedom of navigation back into the Black Sea. So we'll see how they try to exploit that. But it's a start. And I think Zelensky wants to show to Trump at this stage that he is willing to compromise and give in areas where it's not going to cause the Ukrainians huge problems. And I don't think it'll cause them huge problems. It'll be very obvious if the Russians send a guided missile carrying vessel out into the Black Sea and launch cruise missiles from it or something else, and that will break the ceasefire. So I think this is Zelensky putting the ball back into the Russian court, but it's giving the Russians more concessions than anything else. John, you come in and ask, why don't we in Europe tell Trump to back off as he does not want the USA to be involved and let us, the Europeans, who Trump said is our problem, deal with Russia? I'm sure that given the depleted state of the Russian military and economy, we could issue an ultimatum that Putin would not refuse. John, yeah, brilliant. And I think that is where we're working to from a European perspective. The trouble is, for too many years, Europe has relied on the protection that the United States has provided. And that's not just military protection. That's not just troops on the ground, the intelligence support that they give in, aircraft in the air, military enablers, and Europe is not in a position to replicate a lot of those at the moment. But it's also in its defence industrial base. We've relied on ammunition to be manufactured at sufficient volume from a wider whole NATO perspective. And when the United States defence industrial base gets taken out of what Europe can do, theoretically Europe should be able to step up. But this is something that you can't turn on. You can't turn a switch on and increase your production. It takes years to build up the additional capacity, to get the new factories, to bring the new manufacturing lines in, to get the people trained in the basic engineering skills that are needed, to set up the supply chains for your explosives, your sophisticated electronics that are needed in the fuses that are used, to get the technical experience that's needed in the manufacture of gun barrels, whether it be for tanks or artillery pieces. Never mind what's needed in the missiles. And a lot of the highly complex military material that's produced in Europe has got components that come from the United States, and it's whether we can rely on that or not. For example, the UK Storm Shadow missile or the French Scalp missile, which is a UK-French bilaterally manufactured missile, has got US components in it. And those components are what are called ITAR regulated. So that is, they've got military use restrictions on them, which means that the United States has got a say over where and when they can be used. That's why there's been so much difficulty in giving the Ukrainians the authority to use Storm Shadow and Scalp in long-range targets into Russia. So Europe is stepping up. It's going to take time to build up that defense industrial base, that manufacturing capability. It's going to take even more time to replicate some of the intelligence support, whether it be through satellite, whether it be through fixed-wing aircraft, whether it be through human intelligence, or whether it be through signals intelligence and capability that's there. Because we have to remember the United States has got a capability. It is the largest power projection country in the world. It can pick up a big military packet and provide whatever support it needs anywhere in the world. Most European nations can't. Germany has no need to deploy massive capability outside its borders. Neither has Belgium, Holland. France does. The Scandinavian countries don't really. And when Holland, I meant the Netherlands. Spain doesn't. Italy does to a degree, but it's getting that whole force package at a sufficient capacity that it can support the whole of Europe. And that takes time. And we're in that buying time phase of everything that's going on. If only Europe had woken up when Donald Trump was president last time, the 45th president of the United States, and started to build its capacity then, we would be ready now. But I think too many people assumed he would never get back in again. Our next question comes from Anthony. Isn't the most valuable classified leaked intel from this catastrophe that Vance and Hesketh personally hate Europeans? And I think, Anthony, you're talking about the conversation that happened on the encrypted messaging app Signal, which, whilst it says encrypted, it is not something that you can put military classified secrets in it. And I think there was too much detail in that has come out. You have hit on one personal bit, and that is both their views on Europe and Europeans. And I think they're just repeating what Donald Trump says. If we look at Vance and we look at Hesketh and we look at their geopolitical experience, I'll put it that way, they are very naive, they're very junior, they don't really know what they're talking about. And if they're listening, I'll happily debate that with you, because you don't. You are political lightweights when it comes to geopolitics, yet you've been put into this hugely powerful position. And that's something that means that they're repeating what Donald Trump says. And in defense of them, though, Europe has been relying on the United States for too many years. And Europe needs to wake up and start to produce its own defense capability. I think that's happening now. But I think to turn around into this hatred level, there's the polarization of views too much, and it would be better if they were happy with what they're doing to try and encourage Europe to step up, instead of calling Europe freeloaders and coming in with the language that they did. But I don't think they expected those conversations to get out into the public domain. How naive are they? Next point comes from MNM. Love to know what NMN stands for. I'm assuming it's a name, but you never know. You don't want these things. You don't want to assume anything with these things. And you're asking with regard to Iran and its nuclear program. Can you explain why it is so often reported in the media that Iran's only 2 weeks away from a nuclear breakout time? That's a really difficult one to do. Sensationalism over Iran's ability to produce nuclear weapons is something that plays into the hands of the Israelis, it plays into the hands of the United States, it plays into the hands of other individuals that are operating, other countries that are operating across the Middle East to build up the bogeyman status of Iran. Iran builds its own bogeyman status up enough, with its IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard Corps, with its Quds Force that are controlling, coordinating a lot of the terrorist activity around the Middle East and influencing terrorist activity across the world. As soon as you throw the nuclear word into anything, it makes people sit up that little bit more. They take more attention and they scaremonger even more. The 2 weeks is based on a number of different assumptions as to how much fissile material the Iranians have managed to get out of their centrifuge systems. And we know a little bit about the capacity in the centrifuge systems, but not a lot. And that's why it's easy to say that they can produce enough fissile material within 2 weeks. Now, just producing the fissile material isn't enough to build a nuclear weapon. You've then got everything else that can be built around it. But that's all more conventional engineering, and they've got the wherewithal to do that. So Iran is very close to being able to build its own nuclear weapons. But the other area that interested me enormously was in the discussion between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. There was an agreement between the two that Iran would not be provided with a weapon that could destroy Israel. That suggests to me that Iran's been trying to get already manufactured nuclear weapons from Russia, and Trump was sending Russia a warning. So it's an interesting discussion. I don't think we've heard the end of it. The one thing that I will say is, if Israel thought that Iran had a nuclear weapon, Israel would probably carry out a first strike, and Tehran would end up under a mushroom cloud. So I'm quite confident that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon at the moment. Next point comes from Sophie, and that's regarding China. We're going around the world today. I love this. You're testing my mind. China could well be waiting for the right time to invade Russia and get the lands it needs, wheat, oil, gas, minerals for free. Why take hyper-weaponized and train Taiwan and risk conflict with the US and EU when you can take Russia, stripped of army and weapons and money for free, and be thanked by the EU and Ukraine and Belarus and most countries for doing it? Sophie, you can read my mind. But actually, I think from China, there's two different things here. First of all, Taiwan. Taiwan is seen as an errant state by the Chinese state, and Xi Jinping has already said that he's going to have it back, whether it be through force or diplomacy. They want to do it through diplomacy because they don't want the economic shock that will come with trying to take it by force, and the military shock that will come with that as well. However, I do think Xi Jinping has made the decision to take it by force and do that relatively soon in the next 2 to 3 years. How am I saying that? I'm saying that because we're seeing some funny vessels being manufactured that have only got one use, and they're very expensive to manufacture. You don't want to waste money and engineering time in shipyards manufacturing stuff that you're not going to use. And the ones I'm talking about in particular are two things. One, massive undersea cable cutters that can be attached to a number of different vessels the Chinese have got. And the second thing is special barges with ramps at the front that can extend out about 100 meters that are big enough to allow tanks to drive up onto beaches. They've got posts that they can put down into shallow water to build effectively a causeway. That's the one thing that you need if you're attacking into an island nation or you're attacking across a beach, to build a causeway to allow ships to come in to bring your logistics, more troops, more equipment, and get it offloaded onto the beach very quickly. You don't build those things unless you're going to use them. The Chinese are building them. When it comes to Russia, I think Russia at the moment with the Chinese-Russian relationship, China is effectively buying Russia. It's buying access to the wheat, to the natural resources, to everything else. And what it's giving Russia in return is access to the high tech that they need to manufacture weapons and everything else, and that tacit political support. I think China, if it got to the point where it thought that Russia was going to collapse, it would then want to try and protect its investments and could then do as you suggest, invade parts of Russia. And of course, if you go right to the east, to Vladivostok and the ports that are around there, traditionally going back in history, that used to be Chinese territory. The Russians, whenever the Russian Revolution came in, took a lot of the Chinese nationals and ethnically cleansed them out of the region. There's a lot of tension still around from the old Sino-Russian wars of history, and we know what Putin's like in wanting to get things restored back to historical levels. So I think it is of concern that China could attack Russia, but I think Taiwan is very much still in the cards. And if I was going to sequence it, I'd say Taiwan first, leading to a major regional conflict. China will then see whether they're going to continue with the support with Russia from a political perspective. If not, they'll go to protect their investment and they'll take big chunks of Russia. Let's see what happens. I hope none of it does. Then we get into Kenneth. Surely the Russian economy is so war dependent, with its business links to the West broken and Putin's own internal politics based on geopolitical dominance, he can't afford to end the war. Kenneth, I think you're right, actually. They've got to that point where there's no way out for the oligarchs but to try and make their money from what they're doing on the defence side of things, unless they can negotiate big contracts back out into the West again. But the Russian economy has become so war dependent, and we're seeing that with the growth of inflation, with the difficulties that there are in getting individuals into the workforce because so many are being used out on the front line. The Russian economy is in a very unstable position at the minute, and I think within the next 12 months we might see it collapsing, especially if Zelensky can keep attacking Russian oil infrastructure. And then Robert from Canada, great to see that we've got people watching from Canada. If you come from different countries, please tell us where you've come from, because it'd be interesting to know. You say one thing, America, have you lost your minds? Well, I think when it comes to America's policy with Canada and Donald Trump's policy, I think we don't know what direction his mind has gone in, and therefore it's difficult to work out whether it's been lost or not. But please give us some more substance. Thank you for watching this week and posting your questions. Remember, if you want access to exclusive videos and have your questions answered, please sign up for Times Radio membership. I'm Philip Ingram. Thank you. Goodbye.